In 1943, the USDA handed out canning guides and begged American families to grow their own food. 30 years later, they were writing the regulations that made it illegal to sell what you grew. These 25 skills kept your grandparents fed, warm, and free, and every one of them has been criminalized, restricted, or quietly buried since then. What you are about to learn might already be happening in your backyard without you knowing it is against the law. Let us count down. Number 25, selling eggs from your own hens. Your grandmother walked out to that coop every morning, gathered a dozen eggs still warm from the nest, wiped them with a dry cloth, and set them out front with a handwritten sign. Eggs, 35 cents. Neighbors stopped on their way home. No refrigeration, no washing, no stamp from any inspector, just fresh eggs from hens that had names and a yard to scratch in. In 29 states today, selling those eggs off your own porch is a misdemeanor. Michigan requires a food service establishment license. Minnesota demands lot stamping on every individual shell. California will fine you $1,000 per dozen for unlicensed sales. The USDA insists eggs must be washed in a certified facility, which actually strips away the natural bloom your grandmother relied on to keep eggs shelf-stable for 3 weeks without refrigeration. She did not know the technical term for it. She just knew the eggs were fine. Number 24, home butchering a hog with the neighbors. When the first hard frost killed the flies in November, that was the signal. Your grandfather and 2 uncles showed up with sharp knives and a scalding barrel at first light. A 250-pound hog raised on table scraps since spring cost about $8 and provided enough meat to carry the family through April. Hams went in the smokehouse, fat went into lard. Whatever you could not use, you handed across the fence to the Hendersons, and they gave you a bushel of apples in return. That handshake across the fence is a federal offense today. The Wholesome Meat Act of 1967, pushed hard by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, made it illegal to sell or barter any meat not processed in a USDA-inspected facility. $10,000 fine per violation. Virginia and Pennsylvania still allow personal use butchering for your own table, but the moment that package crosses a property line, you have committed a federal crime. 300 years of community hog butchering was legislated out of existence, while the industrial meat packers who lobbied for that law kept right on operating. Number 23, raw milk delivered to the door. Until the 1970s across rural America, fresh milk arrived at your grandmother's door in glass bottles with a thick collar of cream floating on top. Sometimes from a small dairy 2 townships over, sometimes straight from a neighbor's Jersey cow. A quart cost 11 cents. Your grandmother skimmed that cream for butter and fed the skim milk to the pigs. Nothing went to waste. The whole system ran on trust and proximity. Selling raw milk across state lines is a federal felony today. 20 states have banned it entirely. The FDA raided an Amish dairy in Pennsylvania with armed agents over a single gallon crossing a state line. What they leave off the press release is that a 2007 study in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology found children raised on raw farm milk had 41% fewer allergies and 60% less asthma. Your grandmother's milkman was delivering something that would reduce a child's lifelong suffering. It now takes legal maneuvering in most states to obtain it. Number 22, rendering lard for the year. When the hog came down from the hook, your grandmother got to the leaf fat first. Pure white fat from around the kidneys, rendered slowly in cast iron until it clarified into something that looked like liquid glass. 50 pounds of lard was considered a modest supply. It went into biscuits, pie crust, fried chicken, and soap. It kept at room temperature in ceramic crocks for a full year without spoiling. In 1911, Procter & Gamble launched Crisco, which was originally a byproduct of their soap manufacturing process. Hydrogenated cottonseed oil they needed to find a market for. They hired advertising psychologists and spent the modern equivalent of $40 million convincing American women that lard was dirty and their factory product was clean. By 1950, lard consumption had dropped 60%. The FDA banned trans fats entirely in 2018 after decades of evidence linking them to heart disease. Your grandmother was cooking with the right fat the entire time. The industry that replaced it knew exactly what it was doing. Number 21. The backyard smokehouse. Behind nearly every farmhouse from West Virginia to Missouri stood a small cedar structure with iron hooks in the rafters and a fire pit in the ground. Your grandfather hung hams and bacon sides from those hooks and kept a slow hickory fire going beneath them for weeks at a stretch. Cold smoke drifted up through the meat below 90 degrees, depositing antimicrobial compounds directly into the tissue. A country ham cured this way kept on a shelf for 18 months without refrigeration. Nobody got sick. The method worked reliably for 4 centuries before anyone wrote a regulation about it. A Virginia country ham from a certified producer runs about $180 today. Your grandfather's smokehouse produced the same thing from a hog he raised for $8. The USDA now requires a formal hazard analysis plan, a licensed processing facility, and annual microbiology testing for any smoked meat that crosses a property line. The neighborhood smokehouse that fed your family through winter and sent a ham to the preacher every Christmas is functionally outlawed in every state. Number 20, selling home canned goods at the roadside stand. Every August, your grandmother's kitchen became a factory. Bushels of green beans, Roma tomatoes, and corn came in from the garden from sunup to sundown. She ran the pressure canner for hours, lined the cellar with 400 mason jars by September, and put whatever the family would not need out on the roadside stand for 50 cents a quart. Her tomato relish had a following in 3 counties. People drove past better stands just to get hers. 14 states now prohibit the sale of any home-canned, low-acid food. Cottage food laws allow high-acid jams and baked goods, but the moment a pressure canner enters the picture, the state requires a commercial kitchen. Your grandmother used a pressure canner, a dial gauge, and 60 years of accumulated judgment. The state now requires a $40,000 stainless steel kitchen to achieve the same legal result. She would not have understood that logic. Neither do I. Number 19, keeping a family milk cow in town. Until 1962, households in small towns of 5,000 people or fewer commonly kept a single-family cow in a backyard shed. Your great-grandmother in Ottawa, Kansas, milked a gentle Guernsey at first light every morning and had 2 gallons a day for butter, fresh milk, and cream. The cow ate kitchen scraps and grass. At today's prices, she was producing the equivalent of $12,000 a year in dairy for the cost of a little grain and a dry place to sleep. Every municipality has now banned cattle within city limits. Violations carry fines of $500 to $2,000 per day. We traded that self-sufficient arrangement for a 1-gallon jug of ultra-pasteurized milk that traveled 1,500 miles in a refrigerated truck to reach us. Your great-grandmother would not have called that progress. Number 18, home-distilled fruit brandy. Your grandfather in the Ozarks or Appalachia had knowledge of a small copper still that had been in the family longer than anyone remembered. Surplus apples and peaches that could not be eaten or canned fast enough went in. What came off that still was fruit brandy, traded for blacksmith work, given to the doctor instead of cash, and passed around at weddings and funerals. The knowledge of distillation temperatures and proper cuts was considered as practical a skill as splitting firewood. Home distillation remains a federal felony carrying up to $10,000 in fines and 5 years in federal prison. The regulation exists to protect excise tax revenue. It has nothing to do with safety. The government drew the line exactly where the tax money started, and they have held that line for 90 years without apology. Number 17, open pollinated seed saving. Every fall, your grandfather walked the garden one last time with a paper bag. He saved seeds from the most vigorous tomato plant, the corn that handled drought best, the beans that produced heaviest. He dried them on newspaper, labeled the envelopes, and stored them in the cellar. Those seeds had been selected by his family over 4 or 5 generations. They grew true every single year. By 1970, seed companies were replacing open pollinated varieties with hybrid F1 seeds that produce sterile offspring, which means you cannot save them and must buy new seed every season. Today, 4 corporations control the majority of the commercial seed supply. Saving and replanting patented GMO seed is a federal intellectual property violation. Monsanto has sued over 500 American farmers for it. Your grandfather never imagined needing a license to grow food from seeds his family had been improving for a century. Number 16, backyard beekeeping. Without registration, your grandmother kept 2 or 3 hive boxes at the far end of the kitchen garden. She harvested honey in September, took about a third of the colony's production, and left the rest for winter. She sold surplus jars from the roadside stand. The bees required almost nothing except boxes, a smoker, a veil, and the patient to move slowly around them. Most cities now require formal registration, minimum setback distances from property lines, and in some jurisdictions, written consent from neighbors before a single hive can be installed. The registration requirements are well-intentioned, but the effect is that thousands of would-be urban beekeepers give up before they start. Meanwhile, colony collapse disorder continues wiping out roughly 30% of managed bee colonies every single year. Your grandmother's 2 hive boxes in the back of the garden are one of the most ecologically important and bureaucratically complicated things a private American can attempt today. Number 15, building a root cellar by hand, no electricity, no moving parts. Consistent 35 to 40 degrees year-round by digging 8 feet into a north-facing hillside and letting the earth do what earth has always done. Your grandmother packed vegetables in damp sand, kept apples in a separate corner because they ripened everything else too fast, and fed her family stable produce from October through April without a single kilowatt of power. The initial investment was 2 weeks of digging and some rough-cut timber for the door frame. Modern building codes in most counties now require a permit for any underground structure on your own property, even one dug by hand. The permit process alone can cost more than the cellar itself. Your grandparents never applied for permission to store their own food on their own land. That would have struck them as one of the stranger questions anyone had ever asked. Number 14, lay midwifery and herbal medicine. Your great-grandmother sent for her cousin when it was time. That woman had delivered more than 200 babies in farm kitchens across the county and charged $5 in a chicken. She knew which herbs slowed postpartum bleeding, which poultice drew infection from a wound, which root brought a dangerous fever down. She kept it in a handwritten book and passed it to her daughters the same way a blacksmith passed his craft. Lay midwifery is illegal in 13 states today. Kentucky, Alabama, and North Carolina have prosecuted traditional birth attendants for practicing medicine without a license, carrying felony charges of up to 5 years in prison. The FDA's 1994 Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act prohibits anyone from claiming that any plant treats or prevents any disease without agency approval, a process that costs over $1 million per substance. Your great-grandmother knew willow bark reduced fever. Modern pharmacology calls it compound aspirin. She just was not permitted to say so, and the people who made that rule had patents to protect. If you want to hear about more illegal skills, hit that subscribe button. Number 13, gray water irrigation from the sink. When your grandmother finished washing dishes, that soapy water went straight to the fruit trees through a pipe in the kitchen wall. The apple trees loved it. The tomatoes along the fence loved it. Nothing in it was dangerous. A little soap, some food particles, warmth. The trees did not know the difference. Federal and state plumbing codes spent decades classifying gray water from sinks, showers, and laundry in the same legal category as sewage. In drought-prone states, that meant perfectly usable water was piped to a treatment facility, chemically processed, and pumped back at enormous cost, rather than being absorbed 3 feet from where it was produced. Arizona legalized basic gray water systems in 1994. California followed. But in most of the country, your dishwater is still classified as a pollutant. Your grandmother would have found that genuinely baffling. Number 12, foraging on public land without a permit. In 1897, families from Appalachia to the Pacific Northwest foraged from public forests the way their grandparents had for 100 years before them. Ramps in spring, morels in May, hickory nuts in October. It was not recreation. It was grocery shopping, and it was free to anyone who knew what they were looking for. Collection limits, permit requirements, and designated zones arrived gradually and then all at once. In some national parks today, picking a single wildflower is technically a violation. The rules were written for commercial foragers, but swept up subsistence families who had used those lands for generations. Your grandmother knew which mushrooms were safe because her grandmother showed her, and that direct person-to-person transmission is not something a regulation pamphlet can replace. Number 11, wood-fired cook stoves as primary heat. Your grandmother's cast iron cook stove cooked 3 meals a day, heated the downstairs through January, dried herbs on the warming rack, and boiled laundry water all at the same time. She fed it oak and hickory. She split herself from the woodlot and asked for nothing else. A stove like hers cost 2 weeks of blacksmith labor to trade for and lasted 4 generations with no utility bill ever. 19 states now require all new wood stoves to meet 2020 EPA emission certification standards. Uncertified stoves are banned in 38 municipalities, including Denver, Seattle, and the entire San Francisco Bay Area. The new certified stoves run $3,500 at the low end. In some California air quality districts, lighting any wood fire on a red flag day, including in a fireplace you have owned for 40 years, carries a fine of $1,000. Your grandmother's stove warmed 5 generations of children for the cost of a saw file a year. That math does not add up. Number 10, hand-dug wells with hand pumps. Your great-grandfather read the landscape like a road map. Cottonwood in a dry valley meant groundwater within 30 feet. He would dig by hand, line the shaft with fitted stone rings to prevent cave-in, and fit a cast iron pump at the top. Those wells provided clean water for a century. Some still flow today on properties no living person has touched in a generation. Hydraulic drilling companies lobbied throughout the mid-20th century to require licensed contractors for every new well installation in most states. A drilled well with an electric pump now costs between $8,000 and $15,000. In a long-term power outage, it produces nothing. Your great-grandfather's hand-dug well with a hand pump produced 100 gallons a day for as long as one person could work the handle. The people who understood that trade-off are nearly all gone now. Number 9, community barn raising and owner-built structures. If your great-grandfather needed a barn in 1887, he did not call a contractor. He told his neighbors when he was ready, and they arrived before sunrise with their own tools. The frame went up in a day. Everyone worked, everyone ate, everyone went home, knowing the same community would show up for them when their turn came. His barn stood for 120 years. Modern building codes require licensed contractors for virtually all structural work. Owner-builder permits exist, but are slow, complicated, and in many states require you to occupy the structure yourself for a minimum period before selling. The codes were written partly for safety and partly to protect the licensed contractor industry from people who simply know how to build things. The community building day, the most efficient and most human method of construction in American history, is essentially impossible to replicate today. Number 8, keeping chickens in town. In 1940, nearly every American household with a small yard kept chickens. 12 hens produced 10 eggs a day, 8 kitchen scraps, controlled insects, and produced manure that went back into the garden, a closed, elegant, self-sustaining loop that cost almost nothing to maintain. Eggs were not purchased at a store. They were collected each morning from birds your grandmother knew by name. Zoning ordinances banned backyard livestock in most American cities in the 1950s and 1960s, written with heavy input from commercial egg producers who had good reason to want the competition gone. The urban chicken movement has rolled back a significant portion of that damage, and more than 150 cities now explicitly allow small laying flocks. Eggs from hens that range contain measurably higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin D than commercial eggs. Your grandmother knew her chickens by name? You still can. Number 7, the Springhouse refrigerator. Before electric refrigeration reached rural Appalachia and the Ozarks in the 1950s, your grandparents built a small stone structure over the cold creek that ran through the property. Spring water flowed continuously through a channel inside, keeping ceramic crocks of milk butter, and supper at a constant 50 degrees year-round. No energy input, no moving parts. Never broke down as long as the spring kept flowing. Building any structure over a natural water source without a Department of Environmental Quality permit is illegal in 43 states today. The Clean Water Act treats the spring house as a contamination point, regardless of what your family has done with that spring for 5 generations. A permit costs $1,200 to $4,000 and requires engineering documentation. Your grandmother's spring house ran on gravity and cold stone. The one thing it never ran on was paperwork. Number 6, lye soap. From wood ash and saved fat, every winter, your grandmother saved wood ash in a barrel. In spring, she ran rainwater through the ash for several days, collecting the caustic lye water that drained out. She combined it carefully with saved bacon grease over a low fire, stirred it for hours, poured it into wooden molds, and let it cure on the porch for a month. Those bars cleaned everything: laundry, dishes, floors, skin. A year's supply cost her nothing but time. The FDA regulates all commercially sold soap under cosmetic law, requiring ingredient testing, labeling compliance, and manufacturing standards. 13 states require business licensing for any sale at any scale. Your grandmother's soap retained the glycerin that commercial manufacturers strip out and sell separately to cosmetics companies. Her soap was actually gentler. The company that spent decades calling it unsanitary had a financial reason for doing so. Number 5, subsistence, hunting and trapping for the table. Your great-grandfather did not hunt for sport. He ran a trap line in November because the family needed meat and pelts, and the woods provided both at no cost beyond skill. A deer in November provided 50 pounds of venison. Muskrat, beaver, and rabbit came out of the traps and went into the pot. He wasted nothing. The knowledge of field dressing, aging, rendering, and curing was considered basic adult competence. Subsistence hunting exemptions outside Alaska and certain tribal designations do not exist in American law. Every state requires a hunting license. Selling wild game meat in any form is illegal under the Lacey Act in all 50 states. Trapping requires registration in most states and is banned outright in several. Your great-grandfather fed his family from the woods for free and earned spare cash from the fur trade. Every piece of that system is now licensed, regulated, taxed, or prohibited. Number 4, rainwater cisterns in the dry West. Your great-grandmother in Wyoming or New Mexico designed her household entirely around captured rainwater. A cistern under the porch, a barrel at the barn corner, an earthen pond by the garden. She watered crops, livestock, and her family from what fell out of the sky onto her own land. In a good year, her cistern held 2,000 gallons. Between that and the hand-dug well, she owed nothing to any infrastructure. No bill, no meter. Between 1872 and the mid-20th century, 47 states passed prior appropriation water laws that classify rainwater as the legal property of downstream rights holders the moment it hits the ground. Colorado prosecuted rainwater collection until 2016, when they quietly legalized up to 110 gallons. Meanwhile, a Nestle bottling plant in Florida paid $230 per year to extract 1 million gallons per day from a public aquifer, while a Colorado homeowner faced a $500 fine for a 55-gallon barrel under her downspout. Your great-grandmother owned every drop that fell on her land. Her granddaughter rents it from the state. That is not a metaphor. That is the law. Number 3, adobe and cob construction from the ground up. Your great-grandparents in New Mexico or Arizona did not go to a lumber yard. They mixed the ground itself into building material. Clay, sand, straw, and water combined into walls 2 feet thick that stayed cool all summer and warm all winter through thermal mass. Pueblo peoples built multi-story adobe structures more than 1,000 years ago that are still standing. Your great-grandparents built the same way because the material was free, it was everywhere, and it worked. Modern building codes require minimum insulation R values that adobe cannot meet, not because it fails to manage temperature, but because it works through thermal lag rather than thermal resistance, and the code does not distinguish between the two. Adobe and cob construction are prohibited under standard residential codes in most of the country. Your great-grandmother built her house from the ground The ground is now illegal. Number 2, canning. Everything from the garden, including vegetables. In the fall of 1935, it was not unusual for a farm wife to put up 500 jars before the first frost. Green beans, corn, tomatoes, meat, and pickles all went into ball mason jars, sealed by pressure canner and lined up on cellar shelves. A 10-cent seed packet in April became 40 jars of food by October. That wall of jars was not a hobby. It was the family's entire food security for winter. The USDA actively promoted home canning throughout the 1930s and 1940s. By the 1960s, the messaging had flipped. Home canning was being portrayed as a botulism risk and a sign of backward thinking. And the processed food industry, selling factory canned goods at a 30% markup, had every reason to encourage that shift. 14 states now restrict home canned low-acid food sales outright. The broader scare campaign succeeded well enough that most Americans abandoned canning entirely. The knowledge your grandmother carried in her head was worth more than a savings account. The scare worked anyway. Number 1, total homestead self-sufficiency as a way of life. This is not a single skill. It is what all the other 24 skills add up to. Your great-grandfather's farm ran on sunlight, wood, water, and animal labor. He grew his own food and his own medicine. He built his own structures and preserved his own harvest. He did not owe a utility company, a seed corporation, or a grocery chain a single dollar because none of those institutions existed yet. He was not poor. He was sovereign. And sovereignty, genuine, practical, ground-level sovereignty, is the one thing that every layer of modern regulation, corporate lobbying, and municipal zoning has worked steadily to make harder to achieve. The entire infrastructure of modern American dependency was built within living memory and sold as convenience and progress. The grid, the municipal water system, the commercial food supply, the licensed contractor requirement, the seed patent system, all of it constructed within a single lifetime and presented as inevitable. Your great-grandfather's way of life was not primitive. It was a complete system for human survival, tested and refined over 10,000 years of continuous use. We did not abandon it because something better replaced it. We abandoned it because abandoning it was profitable for someone else. And they had the advertising budgets, the lobbyists, and the regulatory access to make forgetting look like progress. Every skill on this list is a piece of that sovereignty. The rainwater barrel and the hand-dug well give you water no utility company can shut off. The root cellar and the smokehouse give you food security no supply chain can touch. The seed saving and the laying hens and the kitchen garden close the loop from soil to table without a single transaction. None of this is paranoia. It is how your family lived for the entire length of American history before the last 60 years. They were not waiting to be rescued. They were already free. Here is my challenge. Pick one thing from this list. Just one. Put up a rain barrel. Save seeds from one tomato this fall. Find the broadleaf plantain growing in the crack in your sidewalk because I promise it is there. And press a crushed leaf against the next bug bite you get. Then come back and tell me your grandmother was wrong. Tell me she did not know. Things we have been paying corporations to do for us ever since. Every skill on this list was legal within living memory. Everyone was practiced by someone in your family tree. That knowledge did not disappear. It just went quiet. And quiet is not the same thing as gone.